So then, we are back with more understandings from the Renewed Covenant, from the Aramaic English translation of the Word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of Israel, from the prophets of Yahweh, giving us then the understanding of the time of the end, and then reading from the prophecies of Yershyiyahu, the 61st chapter, we find ourselves during the time of restoration and reduction of time, ever since then the covenant of death dismantled in 2008, and then at the same time the rulership of Nahashatan ended his 1,000 years time of rule in the earth. What he did was he combined his ideas of heaven and also the rulership with the Gentiles, because the cities were no more after 1009, when the Muslims then destroyed the holy city and the tomb many years ago. So then we are returning to the truth, where then the holy cities must return, and we find ourselves during a very specific time in our age, where then Shimon, when he spoke of the tabernacles, he was then being confronted with the people in many areas of the belief and also the loyalty of the Messiah, where he stated areas of the Torah where his people, during the time of Shimon, they were not believing in the Messiah and they went astray. So then Shimon was experiencing an area where then, rather than himself being a shaliach, teaching them the importance of this factor in enlightenment of the Torah, we find then Shimon complaining because his people, the set apart, they were not doing their job. So then he states in 1 Shimon 4, he stated very plainly, "For it is the time, and the time should come, when discipline will start with the tabernacles of Elohim." We speak of Elohim because Yahweh, in this understanding related with the second tabernacle services, is then the seven spirits of Yahweh, giving then his people the seven functions of the Spirit. So Shimon, he is then related with then the revelation of his glory. If you understand what he's saying is, "But rejoice that you participate in the trials of the Messiah, that you may also rejoice and exult at the revelation of his glory," he is speaking of the Messiah when he returns then to receive his people. So then you begin to understand what then Shimon is explaining to you, and then you begin to understand also that this time of the coming of the Messiah and the exaltation at the revelation of his glory, then meaning the people being very contented when he shows up in heaven and then brings his people up out of this world, and then the world is destroyed with a shout of sulfur. This is precisely what Shimon then is explaining. However, we find then at this very moment, where we are involved with Yershyiyahu, the 61st chapter, we are involved then with Yershyiyahu, the 28th chapter, we are involved with Yershyiyahu, the 1/8th chapter, regarding the first holy city in the land of Kush, and we find then ourselves understanding Israel as being the people led astray because of their lack of belief in the Messiah, precisely what Shimon explained centuries ago regarding the abandonment of the holy tabernacles. Because the context of 1 Shimon 4 gives you then the discipline of Yahweh upon the people because they neglected the tabernacle services. What is the prior of the time he was speaking then? Those that did neglect the house of Elohim regarding his holy tabernacles of the second services. And then previously then he speaks of the revelation of his glory. So it's given you an understanding of the time of the end from Peter's, or should say Shimon's time, So then give you the proper perspective of what he's speaking of. Autumn feast. So then he's speaking of the autumn feast. 1 Shimon 4. Then you find the Yershyiyahu, the 61st chapter, sections of it speaking of the autumn feast. You find Yershyiyahu 1:8 pointing then the first city in the land of Kush, preparing themselves then, because this time then relates the precision of understanding the returning of the cities and then resuming the second tabernacle services. We find Israel at the moment in a very tight corner, where then the Arab League, they are going to get their way. You can be sure of it, absolutely certain. Because when you understand what then Shimon is explaining, discipline, the regular scriptures of the scandalized version states judgment. There is no judgment. Judgment is not performed upon the tabernacles of Elohim. It's not judgment, it's discipline. The word was used wrongly. Judgment is the end when the autumn feast comes. That's the time of judgment. When his people, the set apart, return to the services, that's merely discipline. So then they are being disciplined, and Israel is absolutely cornered, and the only way out of this situation is by then sending an expedition to the land of Kush and finding the holy site and building up the holy city as per the instructions of Yahweh. Go therefore around the world, put to practice what you have learned ever since the time of Moses, and then go around the world and form holy tabernacles. Because the Arab League, they are uniting themselves, and this time they have their way. So then when you understand what Shimon was saying of discipline, precisely what you are watching on television is what is taking place. Because our country, United States, we are not interested in their war. They have to take care of themselves. Part of the discipline of Yahweh at the moment is then for themselves having a dreadful sense of being leveled to the ground. Otherwise, they don't make a move towards discipline. Was already mentioned for them then to resume the second tabernacle services. They are ignoring. They are doing the same junkies as they did ever since then the Messiah was in the earth. And they refuse to understand. Then Yahweh takes then the belt and he tightens and tightens and tightens and tightens until they begin to give in and understand the importance of the returning of the holy city. We are not going to get involved in the war. So then we have the Arab League coming together, and they are truly going to level Israel down to the ground. If they don't do what the Messiah told them to do, finding the holy site, then constructing the city, and start praying as per instructions, then they're going to be leveled. There is no other recourse, no other solution. At this very moment, the holy prophecies of old are working against Israel, because we understand why. Shimon gave us the answer. So when you read Shimon, you understand what it means. Because previously, if you read the first Peter, or then first Shimon, then you begin to understand what he meant. First then, but rejoice that you are then participants in the trials of the Messiah, that you may also rejoice and exult at the revelation of his glory. He is speaking of the autumn feast when he returns. However, then Shimon is explaining precisely then the resistance of his people to turn away from the day of glory. That's when then Shaliach Shimon explains discipline is coming upon then these people because they are rejecting the day of glory. So then Israel at the moment is absolutely cornered. What we are expecting is then the Arab League coming together, speaking, and then starting demanding their ways, and they are going to get every bit of it. Israel is going to be isolated, and the only option is doing what the Messiah told them to do. Thus then you understand discipline. Elohim, you understand, is then in the factor understanding the 7 functions. Elohim means El, and then Him means plural of spirit. Speaking of the functions, second tabernacle services. Because he is speaking during a time of the autumn feast. But prior of this time, then the tabernacles must be in place, and it starts with the land of Kush. What's going to maintain Israel's protection for the future is the prayer in the Holy of Holies of the city in the land of Kush. A direct link from heaven protecting Israel against their predicaments. They have no other option. And this war then is going to continue until the holy city then is in place. It is going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So then we have reached the time where we find ourselves then, 1 Shimon 4, where discipline is coming upon the tabernacles of the people. He meant then those people that did understand the Messiah, his instructions, the functions, and they are refusing to understand what it means then, what yershyiyahu told them to do, coming a time where then the cities must return. There is no way out this time. If Israel refuses to send out a delegation or then an expedition over there in the land of Kush, finding the holy site, let then Ruach HaKodesh find the site and start up with the city, then the dread of being leveled is then in place. It's only a situation of time. It's a siege, spiritual siege. And there is no way out of it. At some point, the rockets are going to exhaust. They're going to try to get more materials. That's when then problems start in the oceans. And then in the air. And then hackers of computerized systems. And then banking. Yahweh has a multi-way of then making sure discipline and then is served. This time they are cornered. It is a very dangerous situation going against the words of Yahweh. This time they are cornered. Discipline has come. The factor is, the faster they send out an expedition over there in the land of Kush, the faster they find then the holy site and then start building the holy city. So then the holy city begins then the prayers as per instructions. We find then we must do as per Moses' instructions, speaking of from the part of the set apart. And then using the updates given in the Codex in the renewed covenant, or then in the writings of the second tabernacle services, merely a reflection of the first, and then the Levites must resume their services. They were acquainted with the services before, from the time of Yohanan until 1009. They were very familiar with it. They have to let then Ruach HaKodesh remind them of the services as then during the time of the Babylonian invasion of the Holy Land, where then Yirmiyahu, he did not know anymore what went on in terms of how to use the elevator system in the temple. Can you remind yourself of it? There was an elevator there. The elevator shaft was already found. Then many centuries later, When they went to use the system, the elevator system, they did not know how to use it. However, if you read Maccabeus in the Apocrypha, you find then he was enlightened at night via then a dream on how to use the system. So Ruach HaKodesh has his ways of reminding his people. But they have to do what they were told to do. Does it mean the entire Israel is going to land of Kush? No. Only a few people selected should put up with it and going out, an expedition, finding the holy site, and then let those who are enlightened then take care of the rest. Because this war is not going to end. Not until the holy city is put together, so then harmony can be reached. They have to make a choice. The more they wait, the worse it gets for them. Read the scripture. You don't have to take my word for it. You have to understand the layers, understand what then the prophets were doing, saying, and then the Shilishim in the future, they said in line with the Torah and the prophets. Now, if you expect somebody to take you by the hand, such as the Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Netanyahu, if he is expecting Yahweh to send a person to take him by the hand, he won't do it. He wants to be in his country, he's going to be in siege. There is no Yahweh Pope or anybody else can save you from there. Should he choose to be there? Be there. He's not higher than Shaliach Shimon. He's not higher than Shaliach Shaul. He's not higher than yershyiyahu, Yirmiyahu, and the prophets. He's not above the Mashiach. He's not above Yahweh. He's a simple person. If he has another opinion, show the Torah where we are at in our time. Show him then the Torah at this very moment. Where are we at in this time and season? I bet you he doesn't know. So he should shut up and do what the Messiah told him to do while there is time. Read the scripture, read the Torah, and then inform the people. That's his job.